Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku had a surprising ally part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. So let's start the video. The 𝐒𝐢𝐽𝐼 were the richest family in 𝐻𝐼 prefecture, if not the entire country. It caused a small scandal among high society when their daughter Momo turned down the easy life of an heiress to become a hero. After she got accepted into UA through recommendation while everyone else was still preparing for the entrance exam. The entire town heard about it, including one hungry thief looking for a big score. Ren sat crouched behind a bush in the 𝐒𝐢𝐽𝐼's garden. He'd been there for the past several hours, still as a statue, while he watched sports cars and limousines streamed into the grand courtyard. Men in tuxes and women in fancy dresses stepped out from each car and into the mansion, from which the sound of a whole private orchestra could be heard. Being the rich people with way too much money to spend that they were, Mr. and Mrs. 𝐒𝐢𝐽𝐼 had decided to hold a grand ball at their Nagoya mansion to celebrate their daughter's achievements before they all moved to Misutafo. If there was ever going to be a time to strike, it'd be tonight. The internal security measures would be turned off tonight thanks to all the guests and servants running about. Sure, it was risky, but Ren had spent the past 9 months sleeping in alleyways and abandoned buildings. His last meal was a bit of cartilage gnawed off a chicken bone from a KFC dumpster. At this point, he was just crazy enough to try. The last of his money had just been spent on a public shower and a laundry service for his clothes. All the stealth in the world won't mean shit if people could smell him coming. He could only hope that his hungry stomach wouldn't give him away by growling at a bad time. Once all the guests had arrived and the courtyard was empty, Ren got to work. He straightened his empty backpack and scratched his nocturnal eyes under his goggles before pulling out his makeshift blowgun. The entire thing had been jury-rigged from a half-inch PVC pipe and a bit of electrical tape. Its darts were equally crude, having been crafted from hot glue, post-it notes, tape, and nails of varying sizes. Not exactly the classiest tools for a cat burglar, but they got the job done. Ren grabbed one of his darts and tethered himself to it with his quirk, Tether Step. The moment he did, he was able to sense everything within a 5-meter radius of it, from the ants scurrying under his feet, to the squirrels in the tree beside him, to the outline of his own body holding his tethered dart. It had become a portable sonar, perceivable only by his neural link with it. He jammed the tethered dart into his blowgun and aimed it high into the air. With lips pressed against the mouth of the blowgun, he released a single explosive breath that sent the dart flying. The dart's tiny silhouette was barely perceptible as it shot across the night skies. Its sharpened tip pierced the brick of the mansion's chimney, well away from any of the CCTV cameras. Just what he was aiming for. Satisfied with the position of his tether, Ren sucked in another deep breath and vanished in a puff of black mist, only to instantly reappear on the 𝐒𝐢𝐽𝐼 mansion's roof next to his dart. The step of his tether step quirk allowed him to teleport to any empty space sensed by his tethered object sonar. Though he could create up to 5 tethered objects at a time, teleporting to any of them severed all his tethers. He took a moment to catch his breath. Teleporting required him to expend some of the air in his lungs each time. Doing so in quick succession could easily leave him breathless, though he thankfully rarely ever found the need to do so. Ren plucked his dart off the chimney and shoved it back in his ammo pouch. He sheathed his blowgun and allowed his swift feet to glide over each slippery roof tile with seamless grace honed from years of breaking into places he shouldn't be. Upon reaching the back ledge of the mansion, Ren gently dropped himself down and started climbing down by the gaps in the bricks, staying in the blind spots of the CCTV cameras. His silky black cat's tail slid out from under his hoodie to help him along. While he didn't inherit his late mother's cat claws, ears, or heightened sense of smell, he did inherit the strength and agility that came with her feline quirk, nocturnal eyes to see in the dark, and a long tail that helped him keep balance while climbing. They weren't quite as flashy as his tether step, but they've saved his hide more than once. Ren carefully lowered himself beside a top-floor window, avoiding its view in case anyone was watching on the other side. He reached a hand into his pocket to touch a regular pebble that he tethered himself to. The mental sonar it produced allowed him to sense everything within 5 meters of it, including through the walls. After sensing no one on the other side, Ren allowed himself to lean over for a peek. Inside was a grand red carpeted hall lined by pricey-looking paintings and decorated end tables between mahogany doors. There wasn't a guest or servant in sight. The former were probably restricted to the ground floor by their hosts, while the latter were focused on tending to Tem. Perfect time and place to strike. Ren used his tether on the pebble to teleport himself to the other side of the window in a puff of black mist. The pebble didn't teleport with him. Instead, it remained outside, at the exact same spot in the air it had been while his pocket was still around it. It promptly fell onto the ground, unnoticed by anyone. As he traversed the empty hallway, Ren pulled out a 1 yen coin which he tethered himself to. It was all the money he had left in the world, and it was about to help him make a whole lot more. The entire mansion had been built by a famous architect before being auctioned off to the richest families in Japan. In the end, it was the 𝐒𝐬𝐽 who placed the winning bid and made the place their home. Since the auction had been open to the public, Ren had an easy time looking up the layout and blueprint of the place by just searching for it at the local library. The research he did gave him plenty of ideas for where to look. Ren stalked the halls with light steps of a master thief until he arrived at the second largest bedroom in the mansion according to the original blueprints. This was probably the bedroom of Momo 𝐒𝐬𝐽, the family's heiress and soon-to-be hero student of UA. She probably has all sorts of valuables in there that she can afford to part with. Naturally, the door was locked. No surprise there. She probably had it locked before going down to attend the ball being held in her honor. Not that that would stop him. Ren could sense a bit of the room through the wall with the tethered coin sonar in his pocket, but the 5 meters didn't even cover a fraction of the entire massive room. He slid half of his tethered coin under the door before flicking it hard into the room. The mental sonar attached to it allowed him to partially sense the layout of the room as it glided across the hardwood floor. There didn't seem to be anyone in the room from what he could sense, but then again it was pretty damn big, so it couldn't hurt to be sure. The tethered coin slid beneath an enormous empty bed. After taking a deep breath, Ren teleported himself on top of the coin, beneath the bed, and looked left and right to make doubly sure no one was in the room. Momo 𝐒𝐬𝐽's bedroom was even more ridiculously large than he thought. Even well-off families would be lucky to be able to afford an entire flat the size of just her bedroom. Meanwhile, Ren was lucky if he could spend a night in an internet cafe cubicle smaller than her bed. Once he was sure he was alone, Ren grabbed his 1 yen coin and crawled out from under the bed. He tethered himself back to the coin and placed it on top of a dresser. The sonar instantly allowed him to make out the contents inside it. Upon sensing that there was nothing but clothes and undergarments inside, he picked up the coin and moved on to something else. The less things of a mess he made, the less evidence he left behind. The less evidence he left behind, the less likely he'd be caught. If he got really lucky, then Momo 𝐒𝐬𝐽 won't even realize she'd been robbed and just assume that she'd simply misplaced all her valuables. It's not like she couldn't just buy more to replace them anyways. Ren placed the coin on a nightstand and hit the jackpot. He opened the bottom drawer and found a jewelry box that should sell for enough money to keep him fed and sleeping under a roof for the next year or so. There was a lock in it, but he could just pick it open later. He grabbed the jewelry box and was about to shove it in his backpack when he noticed a neatly folded letter that had been hiding beneath it. Curiosity got the better of him and he picked up the letter to read it. He'd gone through all the trouble of teaching himself how to read after all. Might as well make some use out of it. Dear Momo, these jewels were given to me by your grandfather the day we were married. I will be seeing him again soon, and I don't think he would mind it if you were to wear them when I no longer can. You'll grow up to be a fine hero one day, I'm sure of it. I believe in you, my little Momo. Love, Grandma. Ren stared at the letter for a moment. The high-quality paper was soft and fine, so much so that it kept even the tear stains of the person who first read it. He took another look at the jewelry box and realized that it was a genuine vintage, easily decades old judging by the style of craftsmanship, but kept in mint condition by loving hands that refused to let it collect dust. The jewelry box and all its contents could fetch for a much higher price than he'd initially thought, but it won't do for something so beloved to be sold off to someone who couldn't appreciate its true value. Ren got the feeling that this was the sort of thing that the 𝐒𝐬𝐽s couldn't replace no matter how much money they had. He folded the letter back to the way it had been and placed it back in the drawer, followed by the jewelry box on top of it. Ren was a good thief, good enough that he could afford to be a bit pickier with what he stole. Trying to sell stolen jewelry was a hassle anyways. He'd have to find a black market vendor or a fence willing to take it off his hands for way below the market price, and he trusted those guys about as far as he could throw them. Hard cash was always preferable, and that shouldn't be in short supply in the mansion either. Ren placed his tethered coin on the other nightstand and was elated when he sensed the outline of a fancy purse. Come to Papa, he whispered to himself as he pulled open the drawer and grabbed the purse he sensed. Inside was an equally pricey-looking wallet that had an entire stack of 1 million yen bills, all freshly printed and still smooth. Sticking out of the card holders were Momo 𝐒𝐬𝐽's student ID for her former middle school, at least 5 membership cards for dessert shops, and way more credit and debit cards than anyone should ever need. Posh little shite, Ren muttered to himself as he gutted the wallet and tossed all the money inside his backpack. This was enough cash to tide him over for at least a year or so. But now that he'd gone to all the trouble of infiltrating the house of one of the wealthiest people in the country, he might as well make sure his pack was filled before he left. He teleported himself back out of the bedroom by sliding his tethered coin out under the door and stalked down the hallway looking for the master bedroom. When he found it, he entered it the same way he did Momo's bedroom and quickly discovered a hidden mechanical safe behind a giant family portrait. Years of practice made cracking the thing about as easy as tic-tac-toe. The fact that Ren could use his mental sonar to sense the exact shapes and movements of the interior mechanism didn't hurt either. His gloved fingers slowly twisted the safe's dial, alternating between left and right whenever he sensed something click in the locking mechanism. Soon the safe swung open and Ren was greeted by more money than he'd ever seen in his life. Countless 10,000 yen bills kept in banded stacks fat enough to bludgeon someone over the head with. Why anyone would ever need this much hard cash on hand when online banking is a thing was beyond him. But he wasn't about to complain. "You rich fucks won't miss a dime," Ren muttered to himself as he tossed stack after stack of cash into his canvas backpack. Even after his bag was full to bursting, there was still enough cash left in the safe to feed a small town for a lifetime. But this was already more money than he could have ever hoped for, and his bag was already heavy as is. There was no point in trying to take all of it with him and risk being weighed down and caught during his escape. Ren took some time to rearrange the cash stacks left in the safe, neatly lining them up the same way they had been with the missing chunk hidden at the very back of the safe. By the time Mr. Ieyasu figures out he'd been robbed, if he ever does, it'd be far too late to do anything. It was mind-boggling to think that this was the way some people live. When Ren was 8 and newly homeless, he tried to get money by begging near a metro station. Sometimes a kind soul would toss him a coin or food which he would gratefully scarf down for a rare meal that didn't come from a garbage can. Other times kids his age or older would beat the living snot out of him for shits and giggles because they knew they could get away with doing it to a stray like him. The rich types, the ones in bespoke suits and expensive watches, didn't even look his way. On the rare occasions their gaze did accidentally land on him, it'd be quickly averted. Any one of them could have done something to help, gave him some money to eat for the day, stopped to wonder what a child was doing out begging by himself, maybe even helped him get into an orphanage that didn't exploit the children they were supposed to protect. None of that matters now though. Nothing matters now but his next meal and his next bed. Ren wasn't one to judge anyways. If he had their wealth, he figured he'd probably prioritize his own life and foremost as well. He closed the safe back up, leaving the dial exactly the way it had been before placing the family portrait back over it. Unless the Ieyasu regularly opened their safe to count their cash, which he highly doubted they did, then they wouldn't even notice anything's changed. Ren tethered Pebble out the master bedroom's window before closing it back shut. Then, he teleported beside the Pebble on the courtyard grounds and slinked away into the night with a backpack of hard cash rocking side to side on his back. He now had enough money to feed and house him for the rest of his life if he could keep it safe. A house or apartment still wasn't in the cards. You needed to have a social security number and an ID card for that, and Ren had effectively been an unperson for the past 9 years. But he'll be able to sleep in internet cafes with actual beds instead of cardboard boxes now. After a few years, once he's grown up enough to pass for an adult with anyone needing to check for an ID, he might even be able to sleep in actual hotel rooms. Things were finally looking up. Then, just as he was about to slip away to his comfy new life, an unsightly scene in the courtyard caught his eye. A man in a fancy suit, presumably a guest, was in the courtyard with one of the Ieyasu maids. It seemed like a secret rendezvous in the garden away from prying eyes. The sort of scene you'd find between star-crossed interclass lovers in a cheesy romance novel. Or at least it would be if the poor girl didn't look so damn terrified as the man ran his unwelcomed hands over her trembling body. Ren felt the world slow down around him. The black fur on his cattail bristled with anger and apprehension. This had nothing to do with him. He could just ignore what was happening and leave with his stuffed backpack of cash. A golden opportunity like this wasn't going to come around again anytime soon. Someone else could come along to help the poor girl instead. Someone who can afford to show their face without being chased out at knife point. He could just leave this place behind, forget what he saw, and comfortably live the rest of his life with stolen money that won't even be missed. He could just. The tip of the creep's right hand grazed the hem of the girl's skirt uniform. He was about to reach underneath it when he felt a tiny makeshift blowgun dart fly straight into his shoulder. The man let out a yelp of pain. He retracted his right hand from the girl to touch where he thought he'd been stung by a bee. The girl seized the opportunity and pried herself away from his grasp before running back towards the mansion. "Get back here, you damn tease," shouted the man as he ran after the girl. He was about to grab the girl's collar just as she was about to make it inside when a puff of black mist clouded his vision. Someone's knee came flying out from the mist immediately afterwards, smashing straight into his nose. This was the biggest, most idiotic decision Ren had ever made in his entire thieving career, and he knew it. But now that he's chosen his cards, he might as well go all in. It'll be a good opportunity to let loose if nothing else. The moment Ren's feet hit the ground, he shot his leg up straight into the creep's crotch. His eyes nearly popped out of his head. His open mouth let out a high-pitched whimper as his knees buckled under him. It was a comical sight, but Ren knew better than to underestimate someone who was twice his size and not starving. For all he knew, the creep might have some overpowered quirk that will obliterate him the moment he lets his guard down. Best make sure he can't retaliate at all. Ren grabbed him by the ears, pulled his head down, and slammed another flying knee into his face, shattering his nose and forcing him to stumble backwards. Not wanting to lose his momentum and with a lot of pent-up frustration he needed to release, Ren kept up the offensive by elbowing the man in the jaw before push-kicking him in the solar plexus. The man, blindsided by the sudden assault, tripped over himself. When he crashed backwards through the mansion window into the ballroom full of high society socialites, Ren realized that he'd just fucked up again. The party stopped. The orchestra ceased their playing to look at the broken window, the beaten-up guest, and the scrappy stranger standing outside with his face hidden behind a mask and goggles. 𝗵𝗲 the girl of the hour herself, stood not 10 feet away in a long evening dress with heels. She stared at him with an incredulous look and a half-eaten apple tart in her hand. "Monster," murmured the creep Ren just beat up through his broken jaw as he lay on a bed of broken glass. Ren's copper-orange eyes darted around from behind his tinted goggles. Upon deciding that no amount of smooth talking could save him from an imminent ass-whooping, Ren turned around and hightailed it out of there. His cash-filled backpack bounced up and down as he ran. Hopefully it wouldn't spill open while he was making his escape. The party erupted into chaos as everyone struggled to process what just happened. Ren kept running as quickly as his emaciated body could take him. "Get back here, you villain," shouted a girl's voice behind him. Ren didn't waste time looking behind him. He could already tell that it was probably 𝗵𝗲 chasing him. An aspiring hero like her wasn't likely to take a stranger waltzing into her home and beating up one of her guests lying down. He ran straight through the courtyard with Momo on his tail. When they neared the walls separating the estate ground from the rest of the city, Ren reached into his back pouch and pulled out a homemade 𝗧𝗵𝗏 he'd cut out of some scrap metal with a hacksaw. They weren't nearly as accurate as his blowgun darts but were much easier to send flying while on the move and running out of breath. Ren tethered himself to the 𝗧𝗵𝗏 before throwing it like a miniature frisbee over the estate walls. The moment it was on the other side, he teleported himself to it in exchange for a bit of the air in his lungs and kept running. He finally spared a glance behind him hoping to see no one there. Instead, he was greeted by the sight of 𝗵𝗲 vaulting over the walls of her estate in all her finery using a long gas metal staff that came seemingly out of nowhere. "Seriously?" Ren swore under his breath. He knew 𝗵𝗲's quirk allowed her to create anything she knows the molecular structure, but the trash tabloid magazine he learned that from didn't mention she'd be so goddamn athletic the chase was starting to take them into the city. He was just able to outpace Momo with the abnormal speed given to him by his feline mutation, but he was encumbered by his loot and on the brink of starvation while she was in tip-top shape. Time to change the playing field into something more suitable. Ren ran into an alleyway he knew to be a dead end. He could almost feel 𝗵𝗲's smug smile on his back when she thought he'd just made a blunder. It was just a shame that he couldn't spare the time to see the look on her face when he ran up a wall and started climbing the building. Momo might be generally fit, but parkour climbing was a very specific skill that needed extensive training or first-hand experience to master. Ren scaled the building in a matter of seconds, hopping off railings and pulling himself up ledges until he reached the top. He ran across the rooftop and threw a bunch of caltrops behind him on the off chance that Momo also knew parkour. Well, he called them caltrops, but they were just metal jacks with the ball points filed down to sharp spikes. Unless Momo has been chasing him in heels, she was probably barefoot. Even these makeshift caltrops should be enough to deter her from following him any further if she did somehow make it to the rooftops. Sure enough, 𝗵𝗲 came vaulting after him on a long metal pole that was growing out of her palm. Apparently she can keep her creations attached to her body so long as they're still in the process of forming. "Stop right there, villain," shouted Momo in the cheesiest stereotypical hero voice in existence. She's probably practiced that exact same line in the mirror a million times hoping to use it one day. Ren leapt over an 8-meter gap between rooftops with her dad's money on his back before turning around to flip her the bird. In her anger, Momo didn't notice the caltrops laid out on the ground. The smug grin on Ren's face vanished into a look of abject horror when instead of stopping dead in her tracks like he intended, 𝗵𝗲 continued to stumble forwards off the ledge of the 4-story building. The world slowed down around him once again, and this time, he didn't hesitate to act. Ren's body moved on its own. He tossed the heavy backpack of his stolen loot onto the ground and leapt at Momo to tackle her away from near certain death. His body collided with hers in midair and his bony arms wrapped around her as they both crashed into the side of a building. There was a soft crack as Ren's shoulder popped out of place. The air was forced out of his lungs when he dropped onto a slanted roof back first, followed by Momo falling on top of his chest. She was surprisingly heavy for a girl with such a nice figure. Or perhaps Ren was just weaker than he realized. A lifetime spent eating food from vending machines and restaurant dumpsters didn't exactly leave him with much muscle mass to speak of. Ren held Momo to his chest with his remaining good arm and planted the soles of his shoes against the slanted metal, hoping to slow their descent. No luck. They continued to slide down the slanted roof. Ren closed his eyes and threw Momo on top of him as he slided down on his back. If nothing else, he could allow his body to break her fall. 𝐂𝐸𝐲𝐷𝐿. The sound of screeching metal pierced his ears. His descent slowed. Ren hesitantly opened one eye, unsure of what he would see. Momo was on top of him, her sweating, wide-eyed face inches away from his. Her heart was beating so fast that he could feel it thumping against his own chest. He averted his gaze to one side and saw that she'd stabbed a quirk-created knife into the metal slanted roof to stop their fall just shy of the ledge. "You saved me," said Momo in between heavy pants. "Against my better judgment." "Yes," said Ren before immediately wincing from a pain in his chest. Something was definitely broken. "You holding tight onto that knife?" "Yeah," said Momo, still in a daze. "You sure you won't let go of it?" Ren asked. "I'm sure." Momo seemed to calm down a bit. "No matter what happens, you won't let go?" Ren asked again. "Absolutely, totally sure." A look of annoyance spread across Momo's pretty face. Her grip on the handle of her created knife tightened. "I'm sure," she repeated. "So stop worrying." "Good," said Ren before immediately sucker punching her in the jaw. True to her word, Momo kept her grip on the knife's handle as Ren slipped out from under her. He pulled another makeshift shuriken out of his pouch, tethered himself to it, and tossed it at the ledge of the building he'd leapt from. But when he tried to suck in air to teleport to it, he found himself unable to. A sharp, constant pain pierced his back and every breath he took was short and ragged. His lungs wheezed inside his chest like a bleeding goat. "I must have collapsed a lung during the fall," he thought to himself. Beside him, Momo was recovering from the sucker punch. She reached out her free hand to grab him with teeth clenched in anger. No time to hesitate now. Ren slid down to the edge of the slanted roof and propelled himself off it with what little strength remained in his scrawny legs. He reached out to grab the fire exit railings only to remember halfway through the jump that his right shoulder was still dislocated. Oh, shit. The last of his meager strength was spent grabbing and holding onto the railing with his left hand while his right dangled uselessly off his popped shoulder. Without the strength left to pull himself up, it wasn't long before his hand slipped and sent him plummeting down. Something in his ribcage cracked as he crashed into a metal awning that dented under the impact and gave way for him to continue his fall. "Land on your feet, land on your feet, land on your feet, land on your feet." Ren twisted his body in midair, trying to relax his body as much as possible to minimize the damage. He bent his knees before the soles of his feet planted hard into the ground and allowed his body to tumble onto his side to avoid hurting his back. His other shoulder smashed against the cold ground. It hurt like all hell, but the pain reminded Ren that he was still alive. That was something to smile about at least. Huh. Ren let out a soft, wheezing chuckle through his collapsed lung. The lack of oxygen going to his head caused dark clouds to encroach upon his vision as his mind went loopy. "Nice try, gravity," he muttered under his breath before his consciousness slipped away. Momo stood with her parents at the bedside of the burglar who saved her life only to sucker punch her immediately afterward. His tattered hoodie and old jeans had been replaced by a one-size-fits-all hospital gown that practically smothered his emaciated frame like a giant blanket, and 4 drip connected his arm, which like all his limbs was covered in various sores and bruises from sleeping in hard places on cold nights. The delicate features of his pale face could have been considered attractive or even downright handsome if not for how gaunt it was from years of malnutrition. Dark bags hung under his closed eyes as he breathed through the help of a respirator. His black cat's tail laid limply on his lap, unmoving. "He's just a boy," said Momo's father, any trace of anger within him long melted away to be replaced by pity. "No older than you, Momo. Why ... how could he have ended up like this?" Stifled tears choked the words inside Momo's mother's throat as she spoke. "Poor thing, looks like he hasn't had a single proper meal in his life." Momo was silent. She still wasn't sure how to feel about the boy in the hospital bed. On one hand, he is most definitely a thief. The bag he was carrying during his escape contained over 20 million yen of the Yaoyorozu's money. It was less than a drop in the ocean of their wealth, sure, but he did try to steal it from under their noses by breaking into their house. And yet, he chose to stay and help a stranger when he could have easily gotten away with the biggest score in his short life. The maid who'd been harassed by the man he beat up told Momo and her parents everything after the cat boy was arrested and hospitalized. If not for him stepping in when he did, the creep who'd dragged her out to the courtyard alone might have gotten away with far worse than a few unwanted touches. Not to mention, when being chased by someone in far better shape than him, he made the conscious decision to literally throw away his haul to save her instead. Those didn't seem like the actions of a heartless villain. They seemed like... The door to the hospital room opened. Momo and her parents turned to see a little old lady in a lab coat with her gray hair held in a bun by a syringe-shaped pin. "Sorry for the wait, dears," said the old lady with a smile. "I honestly thought it was a scam at first when I heard how much money you were offering." "Thank you for coming, recovery girl," said Momo's father. "Sorry to bother you on such short notice," said Momo's mother. "We know you must be busy." "Well, your email seemed so urgent that I couldn't help but be curious." Recovery girl looked at Momo. "Oh, this is your little daughter, right? The one who's coming to UA soon." "That's right," said Momo, glad for the chance to talk to a real-life pro hero, albeit a semi-retired one working as a school nurse. "It's a pleasure to meet you, recovery girl. You'll probably be seeing much more of me once the school year starts." "Not too often though, I hope," joked recovery girl before walking over to the boy's bedside. "Now, let's see the boy you want me to." She paused upon seeing the malnourished boy on the hospital bed. His eyes were closed. His chest barely moved. The oversized hospital gown covering him only served to accentuate the skeletal frame underneath. All sharp bones and taut pale skin. If not for his barely audible breaths aided by the respirator, he could have been easily mistaken for a starved corpse. "Can you heal him?" asked Momo's father nervously. "Keep the money, Mr. Yaoyorozu," said recovery girl after seeing the state of the boy. "I don't know if I can heal him, but it's my duty as a hero and a nurse to do what I can for this poor soul." Recovery girl's lips shot out of her face and planted a single healing kiss on the boy's cheek. Almost immediately, the wounds inside him began to heal. The machines reading his vitals showed them going up and his breathing became more audible and regular as opposed to the silent wheezing it had been. His black cat tail gave a small wag before laying back down across his lap. And yet Ren's eyes remained shut as he lay on the hospital bed, still bone-thin as ever. Recovery girl did a once-over on Ren's body. Sighed. She looked at Momo and her parents, shaking her head. "I've done all I can for the boy," she said. "My quirk only speeds up the recovery time of injuries. I can't just fix years of serious malnutrition and constant exposure to the elements." "Will he live?" Momo asked with hesitation in her voice. Of course she wanted him to live. She wouldn't wish death upon anyone. But part of her still wasn't sure whether or not she should be so concerned about the guy who broke into her house and sucker punched her in the mouth when she tried to chase him. "He will," said recovery girl. "But I don't know when he will wake up. Is there anything we can do to help?" asked Momo's mother. "Just paying for his hospital bill is already doing all you can. The boy needs to be kept on the IV so that his body can receive the nutrients he's been deprived of his entire life." Recovery girl slowly turned to look at Ren. "I'll have to speak to his doctors to figure out what to." She paused when she saw the empty bed with an unhooked IV line sitting on it. Momo's and her parents' gaze followed hers before all their eyes collectively drifted to the left to see Ren at the open window holding a vase. Momo and Ren made eye contact, her sharp dark grays staring into his wide copper oranges. Ren blinked at her. Momo blinked at him. Recovery girl and the parents had their mouths agape in quiet surprise. "Bye," said Ren before tossing the vase out the window and disappearing in a puff of black mist. "Wait, what?" Momo shouted. "We need to let the pro heroes know he escaped," said recovery girl before taking out her phone. "I'll make a few calls." Meanwhile, Ren had just landed on a concrete rooftop besides the shattered remains of the tethered vase he'd teleported himself to. He did a forward roll to disperse the impact as best he could. But every spot he bruised on his body during his last fall still ached from his every movement. Whatever the old lady's kiss quirk did to heal him must have had its limits. Ren guessed it was probably only a quirk that speeds up recovery time while not actually being able to repair any damage by itself. If that was the case, then really should be recovering in bed right now. But he'd rather do that in a dumpster somewhere than in juvie or worse. He leaped through a gap between buildings before jumping onto a nearby brick apartment which he proceeded to scale. The police wouldn't be equipped for a chase through the rooftops. Something so over the top would be reserved for the pro heroes. And if he was lucky, a small case of an injured runaway like him wouldn't be important enough for any of them to get involved. Then, as if the universe were reading his mind, Ren heard a voice call out from under him as he scaled the building. "Stop right there, young man." Ren turned around to see a pro hero with tree trunks for arms and a wooden head that he couldn't tell was a helmet or his actual face. He was standing on the sidewalk, but his wooden arms were stretching up high into the air straight towards Ren as he was clinging onto a windowsill. "Oh, great," Ren muttered under his breath before backflipping off the apartment just as the pro hero's wooden hand hit the wall, causing its roots like fingers to spread across the brick. "You better not be looking up at my hospital gown." Ren landed on the pro hero's wooden arm and immediately started running down it towards the hero himself, perfectly balanced while sprinting on all fours with feline grace. The pro hero's eyes, right before they were forced shut by Ren's knee to his face, the force aided by his running start and sheer gravity. The pro hero fell onto his back and Ren planted his feet hard on his chest before leaping off it into a used clothing store staffed by a single lazy clerk asleep at the desk. "Time to get this stupid thing off me," Ren mumbled as he threw off his hospital gown and grabbed the first pieces of clothing he could get his hands on: a bright orange shirt with a giant yellow smiley face on it and a pair of pastel pink shorts with drawstrings that allowed them to fit around his scrawny waist. Not the most dignified outfit, but they were still less conspicuous than wearing a hospital gown in public. Ren left the store clutching a cloth hanger that he quickly twisted into a makeshift boomerang. It wouldn't be able to return to him once thrown, but he didn't need it to. "There you are," boomed a woman's voice from high above. A huge shadow engulfed Ren, followed by an enormous hand that gently wrapped around his body below the shoulders and picked him up. The giant hand belonged to a giant blonde lady in a skin-tight bodysuit and horned purple mask, another pro hero, and probably someone's fetish. "You're a slippery one, aren't you, boy?" the mountain of a lady teased, clearly thinking she's won. "And you're a confident one, aren't you, lady?" said Ren before tossing his cloth hanger boomerang at her. It curved in the air before getting hooked on the giant lady's hair. Ren sucked in a breath and teleported to the cloth hanger in a puff of black mist. Surprised, the giant lady tried to grab him, but he simply disappeared into her silky blonde hair which smelled of pricey shampoo and conditioner. "Hey, get out of there," she cried as he scaled a lock of her hair until he reached her head. Ren grabbed a lock of her hair and tugged it hard, aided by his feet planted hard against her scalp. "Oh. The giant lady's hand stretched out to grab it where she felt her hair get pulled. Perfect. Ren grabbed as many strands of hair as he could. Then, when the giant lady's hand tapped her own scalp trying to find him, he leapt onto the back of her hand and started tying it up with tiny locks of her own hair by leaping and swinging around under and over her wrist while holding locks of her hair. "What are you, oh?" The giant lady tried to pull her hand out only to feel her pulling her own hair. While she was busy fidgeting about trying to untie her hair from her hand, Ren used another lock of her hair to swing to the rooftop of a nearby apartment. Once there, he rushed down the fire escape and ran off into the crowd of a busy market where he tried his best to blend in. Just as he was starting to feel safe, a deep male voice called out to him from the crowd. "You there, cat boy?" Ren turned to the direction of the voice to see a large pro hero with long, muscular arms and hazard strips around his wrist and forehead. "Oh, for fuck's sake," Ren whispered under his breath before picking up an apple from a fruit stall and throwing it at the pro hero, who easily batted it several meters away. "I don't want to hurt you, kid," said the pro hero. "Just come quietly." "Huh, just try to catch me, speed bump," shouted Ren before turning tail and running. The pro hero gave chase until they were both out of the crowded market. After a long few minutes of chasing in a relatively empty street, Ren's exhaustion and injuries finally caught up to him. A stray piece of garbage littered there by another piece of garbage made him trip and fall on his face, giving the pro hero just enough time to pick him by the collar of his stolen shirt with one of his enormous hands. "Got you," said the pro hero in between pants. "Now, are you going to come quietly or are you going to keep throwing your life away?" Though exhausted, Ren managed a small grin. Didn't you know? He held up one hand to flip the pro hero off. "Cats have 9 lives. Before the pro hero could ask him what the hell he was talking about, Ren vanished from his grip in a puff of black mist, leaving him alone in the empty street. "Wait, what?" the pro hero shouted, looking left and right trying to see where Ren might have gone to no avail. Back in the crowded marketplace, in a quiet alleyway, Ren reappeared in another puff of black mist beside the apple he'd tethered and thrown at the pro hero. Now that the pro hero was out of the marketplace, it'd be difficult for him to get back and to look for him due to the rush hour crowd, assuming he's smart enough to figure out he teleported to the apple he threw. "Ugh." Ren winced and clutched at the left side of his chest. Blood seeped through the fabric of his stolen orange shirt. The surgery scars from the operation that fixed his punctured lungs must have reopened. "Shit," he muttered under his breath. Ren pushed his way out of the marketplace, helped both by his skeletal body allowing him to easily slip past the gaps between people and the fact that most people avoided him due to rightly assuming he was homeless. Once out, he walked into a stationery store where a gaggle of schoolgirls were drawing everyone's attention by fangirling over some stupid mascot being on a pencil case. With them as a distraction, Ren shoplifted a stapler with no one the wiser before leaving for the back of a bar that was closed during the day. A half-drunk bottle of whiskey laid on the ground, probably left there by some drunk the night before. Ren grabbed it and poured half of what little whiskey remained on the stapler and the other half on his wound. He grit his teeth as he stapled the open wound on the side of his chest shut. It hurt like hell and was far from a permanent solution, but it should keep him going for a while longer. This city wasn't safe anymore. The heroes knew his face, which had probably been broadcasted on the local news by now. He needed to escape to a new city, maybe hide himself in the trunk of a taxi and hope that it'll take somewhere far away. The exhaustion took hold and Ren slipped on a piece of trash, crashing onto the dirty floor of the alleyway. He coughed into his hand and examined his own saliva, letting out a sigh of relief when he saw that there was no blood. "All right, so lungs are still intact," he muttered to himself, taking a deep breath to confirm his assumption. He could take full breaths again, though not without some effort. The doctors must have stitched up his punctured lung with the old lady's quirk accelerating his recovery. But he was still far from being back to normal. Those last few teleports he escaped already strained his weakened lungs. It was probably best to refrain from doing any more lest he reopen the wounds. Ren pushed himself off the ground with his elbows only to feel a heavy net fall on his back, forcing him flat against the ground. "There you are," shouted a familiar girl's voice. Ren groaned. "Oh, come on, you again." He struggled to move his head to the side to see Momo 𝗂𝗵𝗲 standing on the rooftop of the bar. She opened her button-up shirt and a whole miniature rescue cushion shot out of her stomach. It landed on the floor of the alleyway in front of Ren and she jumped on top of it for a safe landing. Apparently she didn't even need to be saved from falling that night, and the realization that he'd thrown away the biggest score of his life for nothing pissed Ren off beyond belief. "You're a slippery one," said Momo with a look of stern disapproval on her otherwise beautiful face. "You managed to evade all those pro-heroes. Clearly, you have at least some talent and ability." "Gee, thanks," said Ren dryly as she struggled to get up from the heavy net Momo casted on him. "Coming from you, that really means nothing at all, really." Momo clenched her teeth and furrowed her brow at him as she approached where he laid on the ground. "You're a waste of potential," she said, nearly spitting out the words. "All that talent and promise, yet you decide to be nothing more than a common villain. People like you are the reason heroes exist." The black fur on Ren's cattail bristled. The vertical pupils of his coppery orange eyes shrunk into slits focused on Momo's face as she looked down on him. "Lady, you don't know a damn thing about me." In a split second, Ren tethered himself to the stapler in his hand before teleporting 2 feet away from it right in front of Momo. Momo was in tip-top shape, athletic and almost certainly trained in some sort of martial art. Ren was starving, injured, and learned all he knew about fighting from getting beat up in alleyways just like these. But where Ren lacked in strength and skill, he more than made up for it in underhandedness. Knowing his own lack of strength, he elected to even things out by targeting Momo's weakness. Chivalry be damned. Before Momo could react, Ren shot his right foot up into the air and straight into her crotch. Her eyes widened. Her mouth puckered before popping open and sending bits of spit and spittle flying into Ren's face. Capitalizing on the opening, Ren socked her in her hanging jaw with all the strength in his body, which is to say not much at all, but it was still enough to distract her for a little bit. Ren turned around to make a run for it only to feel Momo's hands gripping his shoulders hard to keep him in place for her shin to shoot straight up into his own crotch. Ren's mouth puckered. His eyes watered. He really couldn't be mad. It was only fair for her to be allowed a cheap shot after he did the same to her. Still, that didn't mean he had to like it or stop doing what he was doing. He donkey kicked Momo without turning around. He had no idea where he hit her, but it must have been something with lots of nerves in it judging by how loudly she grunted. Ren followed it up with a roundhouse kick that turned him back around to face her. The girl was stubborn if nothing else. It'll probably take knocking her out to make him stop chasing him, and that's exactly what he'll do. The roundhouse kick landed squarely against Momo's neck. She fell to the ground and promptly low-kicked his left foot while his right was still in the air, toppling him onto the ground shoulder first. "Thieving underhanded scoundrel," Momo shouted as she pounced on Ren and put him into a rear-naked chokehold. "Self-righteous privileged snob." Ren wheezed back through the chokehold before elbowing Momo hard in her floating ribs twice. When that failed to get her off him, he jumped backwards with her on his back, causing her to crash into the alleyway wall. That finally got her to loosen her grip, and he managed to slip past it to deliver a push kick to her stomach which put her on her knees. Ren tried to run away again only to feel Momo yank him back by his tail. A loud, cat-like yell escaped his mouth. "Oi!" He turned around to uppercut Momo in the stomach. Crotch shots are one thing, but watch the damn tail. Momo coughed out another mouthful of spit. "Noted," she croaked before kicking Ren in the crotch again. Ren dropped to his knees. His left hand clutched his bruised nuts while his right clenched into a fist and returned Momo's favor by uppercutting her back in the crotch. Momo fell onto her knees in front of him. For a good few seconds, Ren and Momo both knelt in front of each other with only soft groans exchanged between them as they cradled their private. "I hate you so much," Momo squeaked through the pain with tears in her eyes. "The feeling's mutual," Ren squeaked back, his voice several octaves higher than Momo's. Once he had adequately recovered, he sent a right hook flying into Momo's face. Momo did the same and both their jaws were mutually rocked by each other's punches. Ren scrambled to his feet before Momo could and tried to knee her in the face only for Momo to catch it with her hands before headbutting him in the stomach. Momo got back up while Ren stumbled backwards. Seizing the advantage, she threw a series of punches at his face and body. Ren tried his best to dodge or block, but a stray punch landing on his reopened wound almost made it unbearable. A cat-like hiss shot through his sharp clenched teeth as he tried to push back. His chances of winning or running away was dwindling by the second, but he wasn't about to go down half-assed. One of Ren's wild haymakers managed to hit Momo in the throat. It made her stop punching for a split moment, which Ren used to kick her hard in the ribs. When he did, Momo caught his foot and threw it upwards. Ren fell hard on his back. Every breath was forced out of his lungs from the impact. Momo then straddled him and started pummeling his face with a flurry of punches all aimed at his face. "Will you stop trying to run away already?" she yelled in exasperation. "Will you stop trying to catch me already?" he shouted back before grabbing Momo by the shoulders. "You rich fucks had plenty of money left." Ren slammed his head into Momo's in a headbutt that carried with it all his pent-up frustration. He'd aimed for her nose, hoping to break the soft and sensitive cartilage inside to possibly knock her out. But a slight miscalculation in trajectory made him headbutt in the forehead instead. The impact rocked both their brains inside their skulls. For a moment there was silence. Then, their eyes rolled to the back of their heads and Ren and Momo each fell to one side with the mothers of all headaches. There they stayed, unconscious by each other's sides while police and pro-heroes alike searched for Ren. In the end, it was Momo's parents and Recovery Girl who found them lying next to each other covered in bruises. "Ah, there they are," said Recovery Girl cheerfully. She paused upon seeing the banged-up shape they were both in. "Oh my, looks like there was quite a fight." Momo's mother knelt beside her and placed her daughter's head on her lap. "Oh, Momo," she said softly as she brushed Momo's hair from her unconscious face. "I'm so lucky to have such a strong and kind daughter." Momo's father crouched down to check the pulse of the cat boy beside her. "She must have really been determined to help this young man, even if he didn't want to be helped," he said quietly. Recovery Girl planted a kiss on the cat boy's cheek before doing the same to Momo. The cuts and bruises on their bodies healed in an instant, though both remained unconscious. "Momo should be fine after a good day's rest," she said as she looked over her injuries. "The cat boy's probably going to take longer, but he's clearly tougher than he looks." "It's a good thing the boys' hospital room has a spare bed then," said Momo's mother. "Momo can stay there. I just hope they can get along," said Momo's father as he dialed his chauffeur's number on his phone to get them a ride back to the hospital. They'll be living together after all. Ren woke up in the same hospital bed he'd run across half the city to escape. Every muscle in his body ached and his head felt like someone had taken a bat to it. Still, he'd powered through worse. Ren clenched his teeth to not allow a groan to escape him as he sat up on the bed. The first thing he noticed was his hands being locked inside a heavy metal box. Each hand was spaced apart from each other and kept just far enough away from the box's walls that his fingers couldn't touch it no matter how much he bent his wrist. "Shit," Ren thought to himself. "They figured out how my quirk works." He stared at the lock on the box encasing his hands before studying his surroundings. A teal curtain divided the room in two, but Ren could make out the silhouette of someone laying in bed on the other side. Judging by the shape of the impressive ponytail on that person, it was probably Momo. Great. Ren froze in place for a moment, staring at Momo's silhouette. No movement. If he was lucky, she would be asleep right now. Once he was reasonably sure that she didn't know he was awake, Ren went back to studying the metal box holding his hands hostage. His coppery orange eyes squinted at its keyhole. The box was completely featureless save for the single keyhole, lacking any product logo to indicate the manufacturer. It was completely impractical for day-to-day law enforcement too, so it probably didn't belong to the police. The thing seemed built to restrain his tether step quirk specifically, and Ren was pretty sure that the one who created it was sleeping on the other side of the curtain. That girl really was a pain in the arse. An idea popped into his head. He bounced on the mattress of his bed slightly to get a feel for its construction and was rewarded by the faint sound of creaking springs. Perfect. Ren used the side of his head to sweep his pillow to the side. He then bit into the bedsheet and dragged it off the mattress corner to reveal the bare mattress. "I hope this works, or they'll be arresting me for destruction of property too." His sharp, cat-like teeth tore through the outer fabric of the mattress and a layer of foam before reaching the springs. Jackpot. Ren plucked out a spring in between his teeth, then slurped it into his mouth. Unpleasant as its semi-sharp ends were, it was still far from the worst thing he'd put in his mouth. The metallic taste of the spring mixed with that of his own blood inside his mouth as he bent and straightened it with his teeth and tongue. Once the spring had been thoroughly chewed into a workable lockpick, Ren pushed its tip out of mouth and into the keyhole of the box holding his hands hostage. He wiggled the makeshift lockpick up and down with his lips, clicking each pin inside the locking mechanism until, after what felt like an hour of trying, the metal box encasing his hand popped open. "Huh." Ren pulled his hands out of the metal box. "Suck on that, 𝐒𝐩𝐢𝐺." As if on cue, the teal curtains beside him were slid away to reveal Momo 𝐒𝐩𝐢𝐺 standing on the other side, very much awake and angry as all hell. Ren blinked at her. She stared down at her with steely gray eyes. "Think fast." Ren tethered himself to the metal box and threw it right at Momo's head. She caught it without effort and threw it to one side with an annoyed look on her face. But by then, only a puff of black mist remained on the hospital bed. Too slow. Ren, now behind Momo, shot his foot up full force to kick her between the legs. Momo's eyes widened again. All the saliva in her mouth shot past her lips and dripped onto the floor. She turned around to look at Ren, red-faced from a mix of anger and embarrassment as she held her privates with both hands. "Is that the only move you know?" She squeaked through the pain in her groin. Hey, as long as it works, said Ren before roundhouse kicking her in the face. Ren picked up the metal box and tethered himself to it again as Momo lay reeling on the ground. She might have built the box to trap him, but now it was going to be his ticket to freedom. Later, sucka, said Ren before spinning around a couple times for momentum and tossing the whole metal box out the window. Once his mental sonar told him that the metal box was within 5 meters of the nearest edge, Ren teleported to it and got ready to make a break for it again. He got about 3 steps in before a huge shadow casted over him, followed by giant hands wrapping around his body. Whoa there, said a familiar woman's voice. Recovery girl was right. This kid's got spunk. Ren wiggled within the giant hand's grip until he saw the giant blonde lady it belonged to. The same one who tried to catch him the first time. Oh, you've got to be shitting me. Ren grit his teeth as he struggled in the giantess's grip, biting and squirming in her hand to little effect. Let me fucking go. No can do, kiddo, said the giant lady. Granny Recovery Girl told us to stick around to make sure you don't escape specifically. Standing in the streets below were the 2 other pro heroes who'd tried to stop him earlier, a lean man with a body partially made of wood and a hulking man with giant arms decorated by heavy hazard stripe bracelets. The boy's fighting spirit is impressive, said the wooden man as he watched Ren struggle in the giant lady's grip. The muscular man in the stupid hazard stripes getup let out a hearty laugh. I can already tell this kid's going to be a menace at UA. Ren stopped squirming in the giant lady's grip. Wait, say what now? Oh, right. A smug smile spread on the giant lady's face as she set him on the ground in front of the other 2 pro heroes. You probably haven't heard since you keep trying to run away. Mr. and Mrs. 𝐎𝐸𝐸𝐺 decided to take you in. The muscular hero patted Ren's sore shoulder with one enormous hand. And, if you want it, enroll you in UA. The giant lady shrunk back down to normal size and joined the other 2 pro heroes in looking at Ren for a response. Sorry, but I think I still have a concussion. What did you just say? It's thanks for defending their servant's honor, not to mention saving their daughter's life, said the wooden hero. It's a chance at a whole new life, young man. Ren squinted at the pro heroes, unsure of what to think. You're all just fucking with me, aren't you? No, said an unfamiliar man's voice behind Ren. They're not. Ren turned around to see Mr. 𝐎𝐸𝐸𝐺 walking out of the hospital doors with his wife, who was holding a large paper bag with some sort of fancy brand on it. We were waiting for the nurse to tell us you woke up in the lobby, said Mrs. 𝐎𝐸𝐸𝐺 with a smile. Seems like you came to us instead. The fur on Ren's black cattail bristled in uneasiness. He eyed the rich couple in suspicion. What's the catch? There's no catch, Mr. 𝐎𝐸𝐸𝐺 assured him. The police couldn't find any documentation on you. No missing person cases, runaway cases, birth records, school records, nothing. So tell me, what's your name, young man? Ren 𝗧𝗵𝗃, said Ren after a few moments. Ren, Mrs. 𝐎𝐸𝐸𝐺 repeated the name back to him. Such a nice name. Do you have a family to go back to, Ren? My mum died when I was 6, said Ren, still suspicious and sneaking occasionally glances at the nearby pro heroes. I've never met my father. I see. A sad, almost tearful spread across Mrs. 𝐎𝐸𝐸𝐺's face. You've lived a hard life, haven't you? Come with us and you'll never have to be hungry again, said Mr. 𝐎𝐸𝐸𝐺, and I promise you'll always have a warm bed waiting for you. Ren was silent. Over the years, he'd gotten pretty good at reading people. It helped him gauge a person's awareness so he could pickpocket them. But it also gave him an easier time spotting the subtle tics of liars which neither of the 𝐎𝐸𝐸𝐺s displayed. Oh my god. Ren wondered if he was dreaming or not, if not for the passive pain and soreness racking his entire body. You're actually serious, aren't you? Absolutely. Mrs. 𝐎𝐸𝐸𝐺 reached into her fancy paper bag. Oh, and I got you a little something for you too. Ren's cattail shot straight up in attention when he saw Mrs. 𝐎𝐸𝐸𝐺 pull out a bento box. Here, she said, handing it to Ren with a smile. This is for you. Think of it as a housewarming gift. Ren wanted to remind her that he still hadn't decided whether to go with them yet or not, but the faint smell of something delicious inside the bento box instantly disintegrated any thoughts unrelated to his empty stomach. The bento box still had its seal unbroken, so it probably wasn't poison. Upon breaking it and opening the box, he was greeted by a beautifully arranged assortment of various sushis ranging from fresh salmon and fatty tuna to grilled eel and sweet egg. Sorry if we're being presumptuous, said Mrs. 𝐎𝐸𝐸𝐺. But we thought you might like sushi since, you seem to be a cat and all. If you don't like it then we can. She didn't get the chance to finish before Ren started shoveling the sushi into his mouth by the handful, his black cat's tail quivering in pleasure at the taste of high-quality food he never could have dreamed of eating. The 𝐎𝐸𝐸𝐺s and pro heroes had sad smiles on their faces as they watched Ren devour his first proper meal in years. "Aw, you poor thing." The giantess heroine pat Ren on the head. Ren wanted to bite her hand for even trying to touch him, but he didn't want to ruin the taste of delicious sushi in his mouth and so tolerated her ruffling his already frizzled black hair. "We can give you a proper education, Ren," said Mr. 𝐎𝐸𝐸𝐺. We can have you enrolled in UAS General Education Studies if you want. And if you have trouble with any subjects, we can pay for the best tutors in Japan, no problem. But considering your potential, we'd be more than happy to sign you up for the Hero Studies course instead too, Mrs. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 added happily. You might even be in the same class as our little Momo if that's the case. I second that option, said the wooden pro hero with an approving nod. 3 pro heroes had a hard time trying to catch you during your first escape. You might have even gotten away if not for the 𝐻𝐻𝐸 girl. That kind of natural talent is rare. Put on a bit of muscle and hit the books and I could see you easily becoming a pro hero, said the muscular hero with the long arms. The top 10 might have to watch out for competition if you join UA. Ren spoke through a mouthful of fish and rice. Not a bad idea. Despite himself, Ren had to admit that getting praised felt good, especially when it came from the people who he was ready to throw hands with a few minutes ago. He considered the possibility of him becoming a pro hero as he continued to shove sushi and sashimi inside his maw. Ren had always known they existed, though not much else. He didn't keep up with the rankings, the celebrity drama around them, or social media in general. All he knew was All Might was at the top and they beat up bad guys and saved people sometimes. After 9 years of getting chased from restaurant dumpsters and getting his shit kicked in by sadists in the same alleyways he slept in, it would be nice to have people praise him like they did pro heroes. If anything, he could use it as a metaphorical fuck you to all the people who only ever saw him as vermin. Still, the UA Hero course couldn't be easy and he'd practically be committing himself to a single career path. A very pissed-off girl's voice snapped Ren from his thoughts. You. Momo stormed out of the hospital's front doors, red-faced and covered in so much sweat soaking her body that her hospital gown was clinging to her skin. Just who do you think you are? 𝗧𝗵𝗲, said Ren dryly. He looked Momo up and down. Did you just run down the 7 floors worth of stairs from our hospital room? Yes, said Momo in exasperation, turning even more red than before. Because you're an asshole. Language, young lady, said Mrs. 𝐻𝐻𝐸. Either way, that's no way to speak to your new brother. Momo looked slack-jawed at her parents. You mean he hasn't officially accepted yet? Mr. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 looked expectantly at Ren. We're still waiting for an answer. Well, since you all asked so nicely, I guess I have no choice but to go with you guys. A smug grin spread across his gaunt face. Also, I think I'll take your suggestion and enroll in the hero course. Momo's eyes widened in horror and she turned to her parents with eyes wide with disbelief. Wait, what? We didn't talk about that bit. You admitted yourself that the boy's got potential, Momo, said Mr. 𝐻𝐻𝐸. It'd be a crime to not help him live up to it. I might even have more potential than you. 𝐻𝐻𝐸, said Ren with a Cheshire grin that showed off his sharp feline teeth. We might have tied when we fought last time, but that's only because I was injured and out of shape. Give me a few months to bulk up and I'd kick your posh arse. 90% of the reason behind Ren's decision might have come from wanting to fuck with Momo for the next 3 years, but the look of indignant fury she gave him in that moment made it 100% worth it. You wish, cat boy, Momo shouted at him. I was holding back so I wouldn't accidentally cripple you. Is that a fact? Ren put his hands on his hips as his cat tail flicked to one side in contempt. Momo may be a head taller than him, but he still found a way to look down on her through sheer spite. I'm ready to scrap if you're ready to put those band notes where your mouth is, princess. The 3 pro heroes watching the scene looked on in amusement. The size-changing giantess was giggling to herself while the wooden man and muscular speed bump held back their laughter. I can tell that you two will get along just fine, said the giantess hero. Anyways, we pros should get going now that everything here's been sorted out. I trust you folks can take it from here. We'll be fine, said Mr. 𝐻𝐻𝐸. Thank you, Mount Lady. You too, 𝐒𝐵𝐵𝗿 and 𝗓𝗏𝗄𝐼𝐺. You've saved us a lot of trouble. Don't mention it, said 𝗓𝗏𝗄𝐼𝐺. We were just doing our job, 𝐒𝐵𝐵𝗿s added. Just please, take care of Ren and Momo. They both have bright futures ahead as pro heroes. We will, said Mrs. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 with stars in her eyes. I'm so excited to have a new member of the family. Mr. 𝐻𝐻𝐸, who'd secretly always wanted a boy, nodded in agreement. I'll call us a ride and have the maids prepare a bedroom for him right away. Within a few minutes, Ren and Momo were discharged from the hospital. Momo's parents had to pay for the bed Ren had ruined, but it was less than a fraction of a dot to their ridiculous wealth anyways, so neither of them seemed particularly upset about it. If anything, they seemed impressed. Let me get this straight. You bit through the mattress to get to the spring, which you then used as a lockpick. Mrs. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 let out a small chuckle as she leaned on her husband at the back of the limousine. You're pretty resourceful, Ren. That's a good trait to have, whether in business or hero work, said Mr. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 approvingly. Momo could learn a thing or two from you. Ren mumbled through a mouthful of bread and meat while Momo seethed beside him. He was sitting on opposite ends of the same limousine sofa seat as Momo, demolishing everything in the mini-fridge which the 𝐻𝐻𝐸 had made the mistake of allowing him access to. And you could learn quite a bit from her too, Mrs. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 added. She's a genuine genius, you know. Momo went from glaring at Ren to staring at her feet with a face red from the sudden compliment. "I'm not sure if I have all that much that I can teach him," she said shyly. Finally, Ren washed down to food with a can of soda pop before immediately going back to stuffing his face again. "Something we can agree on." The red on Momo's face turned from embarrassed to angry. "Okay, I take that back. I think can teach him some manners." "Oh really now?" Ren swallowed the handful of finger sandwiches in his mouth before flipping Momo his own finger. "Is the first lesson learning how to sit with that stick up your arse?" "Why you?" Ren and Momo continued to bicker with each other the entire ride to the 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐳𝐻's new mansion in 𝗵𝘃𝗏. Momo might have been way more fit and far better trained, but Ren had her beat in the trash-talking department by a mile. His vocabulary was so colorful that half the time Momo wasn't even sure what he was saying except that it was meant as an insult. Mr. and Mrs. 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐳𝐻 watched on in mild amusement as their daughter and newest adopted son bicker. Mrs. 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐢𝐳𝐻 shot a knowing smile at her husband, who merely rolled his eyes. He was all too familiar with the sort of belligerent tension between Momo and Ren. Profound annoyance mixed with no small amount of begrudging respect for each other's abilities, which only made them want to improve themselves to one-up the other. Ren and Momo's interactions almost mirrored how Mr. 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐳𝐻 was with his wife when they were still kids, while he had decided to adopt Ren as a son. But if he was going to be a son-in-law too, then he wasn't about to complain. Momo wasn't the type of girl to go around messing with boys, so maybe having this boy constantly messing with her will finally get him grandkids someday. He could only hope they didn't already sterilize each other with all the crotch shots they traded. Mr. and Mrs. 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐳𝐻 stared down at the sheets of paper in disbelief. "This can't be right, can it?" Mr. 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐳𝐻 asked the tutor, rereading the results over and over again as if it was going to change. "I don't want to seem like I'm doubting Ren," said Mrs. 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐳𝐻. "But are you sure he didn't ... you know? I mean, he is a crafty one." "The test was done and graded on a computer and we had cameras everywhere watching him take it," said 𝗧𝗵𝗃, the tutor who used to teach Momo, now assigned to Ren. "There's no possible way he could have cheated. These results are genuine. 157 ... That's almost the same IQ score as Momo when you were still tutoring her, isn't it?" said Mr. 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐳𝐻. "It's actually higher than Momo by 2 points, said 𝗧𝗵𝗃. "But that's just the overall score. Ren scored higher than her in perceptual reasoning and processing speed, while Momo has him beat in working memory and verbal comprehension." "What about the mock SATs?" 𝗧𝗵𝗃 pulled out the results of Ren's test from her briefcase and laid it out on the table. "It's ridiculously high too, considering his upbringing." She set down Momo's old test scores to compare them with Ren's. Momo scored higher in the mock SAT overall, but Ren could still get into just about any school he wants with scores like these. He even did better than Momo in some subjects like English comprehension and classical literature of all things. Not to sound ungrateful, but how is this even possible? Mrs. 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐳𝐻 asked. "Ren has never set foot in a school his entire life, but he's just able to easily rival Momo in intelligence." "It's possible that he may be self-taught," said 𝗧𝗵𝗃. "You did mention that he was resourceful, didn't you?" "I did, but I didn't think it'd be to this extent," said Mr. 𝗂𝐻𝐢𝐳𝐻. "What are your recommendations for him going forward?" "Honestly, with this kind of aptitude, I don't think he really needs me tutoring him in academics as long as he's diligent enough to study the material on his own. It might be better to focus on improving his health and physical training for the practical portion of the UA exam." "We'll have to contact Kagami-sensei then," said Mrs. 𝗂𝐻𝐢𝐳𝐻. "If she could train Momo, then she should have no trouble with Ren. I'd also recommend hiring a nutritionist to make sure Ren's body is healthy enough to start training with her," said 𝗧𝗵𝗃. "Because holy shit, that boy looks like he needs a sandwich." Mrs. 𝗂𝐻𝐢𝐳𝐻 let out a soft chuckle. "Don't worry, we've been feeding him well in the week since he's got here," she assured the worried tutor. "But you're right. I don't mind him raiding our fridge, but we should make sure he's getting the right nutrients to put on some muscle." "Agreed," said her husband. "We'll be sure to talk to Ren about this and ask him how the heck he scored so high on all these tests." 𝗧𝗵𝗃-sensei went on her way while Mr. 𝗂𝐻𝐢𝐻 had their butler 𝗬𝗵𝗲 contact Momo's old martial arts instructor to come train Ren at her earliest convenience. The couple then went around their new 𝗵𝘃𝗏 mansion looking for their adopted cat boy. They ran into Momo along the way, sitting in the dining room with an annoyed look on her face as she stuffed herself with chocolate bonbons. "Are you all right, dear?" Mrs. 𝗂𝐻𝐢𝐻 asked upon seeing her daughter fueling her quirk so aggressively. "Did something happen?" "I'm fine," said Momo as she shoved another luxury chocolate truffle into her mouth. "Does it have to do with Ren?" Mr. 𝗂𝐻𝐢𝐻 asked. Momo winced at the truth. "It's just ... he's so infuriating." "How so?" Mr. 𝗂𝐻𝐢𝐻 asked. "Ever since he figured out my study schedule, he's been playing the saxophone while on a tree branch outside my room whenever I try to study just to annoy me." Momo shoved 4 chocolate truffles into her mouth at once. "I don't even know where he got the saxophone." "Aw, that's actually kind of sweet," said Mrs. 𝗂𝐻𝐻. "He's giving you a nice soundtrack to study to." "Wait," Mr. 𝗂𝐻𝐻 grimaced. "Isn't your room on the 4th floor, Momo?" He probably teleported there with his quirk, said Momo through a mouthful of chocolate, and he's definitely not trying to help. His saxophone playing sounds like the screams of a dying animal. Do you know where he is now? Mrs. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲 asked. He's probably still napping in the tree, said Momo. He likes to sleep in the strangest places. Thank you, Momo. Mrs. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲 put a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. And do be patient with Ren if you can, dear. The boy's had a hard life. It's only natural for him to take a while to adjust. I guess, Momo mumbled. What do you need to talk to him about? We have to discuss his training for UA, said Mr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲. We're going to have Kagami-sensei over again to train him. Momo perked up at the mention of her old teacher. That's a lovely idea, father, she said with a slightly smug smile on her face. Maybe Kagami-sensei can finally teach that cat some proper discipline. We'll see things go, said Mrs. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲. And don't forget to take care of yourself too, Momo. The 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲 couple made their way outside towards the giant cherry blossom tree growing in their garden. Sure enough, just as Momo said, their adopted cat boy was curled up asleep on a branch 4 stories up in the air. Though he was no longer quite as gaunt as he was when they first took him in, he was still so dreadfully thin that the thin silk pajamas he didn't bother changing out of that morning looked like an oversized blanket wrapped around him. His black cat tail hung off the branch lazily swinging side to side in a steady rhythm while his scrawny arms were wrapped around some sort of large golden object. He really is like a cat, Mr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲 muttered under his breath. Ren dear, Mrs. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲 shouted towards the treetop. Can you hear me from up there? There was no response at first. Then, Ren's black cat tail stopped swinging to rest atop the branch. He stirred awake shortly afterwards to look down at the 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲, still half asleep. The slit pupils of his copper-orange eyes expanded ever so slightly when he saw his adopted parents at the base of the tree looking up at him. Ren let out a long yawn before stretching and dropping whatever he was holding off the branch. Startled, Mr. and Mrs. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲 jumped backwards as the object plummeted down only to be caught by Ren, who'd teleported to it in a puff of black mist just as it was about to hit the ground. Heyo, said Ren, holding the object that turned out to be a whole saxophone while his cat tail flicked side to side behind him. Anything I can do for you too? Oh, we just wanted to see how you were doing, dear, said Mrs. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲. Where'd you get that saxophone? Mr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲 asked. Found it in your music room. Ren played a single toot on the saxophone that sounded like a trumpeting baby elephant with asthma. It was being left to collect dust, so I decided to make use of it. Why the saxophone in particular though? Mrs. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲 asked. We have lots of instruments to choose from, you know. Well, you know how my quirk is linked to my breathing? Ren asked, causing his adoptive parents to nod. Well, I figured that I could train myself to control my breathing and increase my lung capacity by blowing on the sax regularly. Why all the way up on a tree though? Mr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲 asked. Because cat, said Ren sarcastically. And also I wanted to train my balance at the same time. Whenever I play I'd usually do it while walking up and down the branches. Huh. Mr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲's face beamed with approval. So all this time you were already putting in effort to train on your own. And here I thought you were only doing this to annoy Momo. Oh, yeah, that's a big bonus, said Ren with zero hesitation and a smile. She can consider it training for her too. A hero's gotta learn to keep their cool even while distracted, right? You know, Momo plays piano too, said Mrs. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲. We could give you some proper saxophone lessons so you can jam out with her in the music room sometimes. I'll gladly take the saxophone lesson. Not sure about the jam sesh though. Ren paused for a moment. Oh, that reminds me. You know that Claude Monet you have hanging for decoration in the music room? Yes, said Mr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲, surprised that he even bothered to recognize the painting. Why, it's a fake, said Ren casually. The brush works far too modern and it uses paint and hues that hadn't even been invented yet in Monet's time. If I tried to sell that to a fence they'd laugh me out of the black market with just a few $100. Mr. and Mrs. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲 looked at each other for a moment. There's something else we were meaning to ask you, said Mrs. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲 gently. Please don't take this the wrong way or anything, but we just got to know, how exactly are you so smart? You told us you never finished middle school, added Mr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲. But your scores on the tests we gave you were better than most honor students. So ... how? Ren shrugged. Annoyance, mostly. The 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲s raised their eyebrows in unison. Annoyance, Mrs. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲 asked with incredulity. Annoyance, Ren repeated. When I come across something I don't know, I get annoyed at myself for not knowing about it. So, I try to learn it. I stayed in internet cafes a lot so I'd look up stuff I'm curious about online. It's how I learned what causes the weather, how babies were made, a bit of quantum physics, and a whole lot of other things. If a subject interested me in particular, I'd also sneak into a library to help myself to the books on it. Is that how you learned English too? Mr. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐲 asked with no small sense of awe in his voice. Your scores were as high as a native speaker. Kind of, said Ren in perfect English with, oddly enough, a thick British accent. I found an English copy of Pride and Prejudice while dumpster diving one day. It seemed like a waste to not make use of it, so I started watching old British shows online to learn English and read it. You, really, or something else, huh? Mr. 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐼𝐳 said with surprise and awe mixing in his voice. Did you like it, though? Mrs. 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐼𝐳 asked excitedly. Pride and Prejudice, I mean. It was interesting, but I can only be so invested in the lives of rich wankers while living in abject poverty, no offense. None taken, said Mrs. 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐼𝐳 with a bright smile. Oh, I'm so glad you decided to let us take you in. Unable to resist her parental instincts any longer, Mrs. 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐼𝐳 patted Ren on the head. His hair was still just as messy as it had been when he was a stray, but now that he had regular access to an actual shower and quality shampoo, it had gotten almost unbelievably fluffy and soft to the touch. Ren, for his part, stood there and took the head pats with the same look of stoic indifference most cats in ancient Egypt probably had as high priests worshipped at their feet. The only sign of his true feelings was in his black tail, which was pointed straight up and waving slowly side to side in content. Mr. 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐼𝐳 cleared his throat, trying to resist the call of Ren's very fluffy and pettable kitty cat head himself. Well, we were actually hoping to discuss your education, Ren, he said calmly. If we gave you the textbooks to study for the UA entrance exams, do you think you could study by yourself for it? I've already been doing that. Ren slipped out of Mrs. 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐼𝐳's ceaseless petting to grab a backpack which had been resting against the trunk of the tree he'd been napping on. You two have a very extensive library, so I helped myself to it. Hope you don't mind. Upon being handed the backpack by Ren, Mr. 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐼𝐳 saw it filled with several heavy textbooks that were entirely way too advanced for high school. We don't mind at all, said Mrs. 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐼𝐳. Why did you have these books here, though? I've been reading these books while hanging upside down from a tree branch to improve my focus and flexibility while studying, said Ren plainly, as if everything he said was completely normal. They're also heavy enough that I'm training arm strength at the same time, too. Oh, Mrs. 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐼𝐳 wasn't sure if she should be impressed or concerned. Guess we don't have to worry about you passing the written exam, huh? Then that means we'll just have to focus on the practical portion of the exam, said Mr. 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐼𝐳. We've already called the martial artist who trained Momo. We'd like you to start training with her too for the UA exam. I can already kick plenty of arse by myself, said Ren. But I suppose getting a fancy black belt wouldn't hurt. We're also considering getting you a nutritionist, added Mrs. 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐼𝐳, so you can put some proper muscle on your bones. It might mean you can't just eat whatever you want from now on, though. That's fine, said Ren. I've gone days without food and broke the fast literal rats before. As long as it's edible, you won't hear me complaining. You ate rats, Mrs. 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐼𝐳 asked with disgust and pity mixing on her face. Hey, when you're starving you'll get your protein where you can get it, he said casually. Rats, pigeons, fish from public parks, the odd snake here and there. I'll eat it if I can catch it, though I draw the line at cats and dogs. Well, hopefully the nutritionist won't put any of those things on your menu, said Mr. 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐼𝐳. If all goes well, your training can start next week. Can't wait, said Ren dryly before stretching his arms and letting out a yawn. I think I'll continue my cat nap now if that's all right. As long as you keep up your training, said Mr. 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐼𝐳. You seem to be doing well for yourself so far even without our help. Awesome. Ren gave his adoptive parents a thumbs up before starting to 4-point climb his way back up the tree with a heavy saxophone slung over his back. We did give you a bed, right? Mrs. 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐼𝐳 asked as she watched her new son making his way up the tree with rather impressive speed. Is there something wrong with it? We can get you a new one if you'd like. Oh, the bed's fine, said Ren. I just like the breeze up here, that's all. Mrs. 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐼𝐳 could tell there was a little more to it than that but decided not to press him. She left with her husband back into the mansion to discuss future plans for Ren's future. The cat boy could open himself up to her at his own pace, if at all. What's important now was that he knew he was no longer a stray, but a member of a family. It was just a shame he didn't get along with all of them. About half an hour later, Momo returned to her bedroom after cooling herself off at the indoor gym. Ren was still on the branch outside her window, curled up hugging a saxophone which he was mercifully too asleep to play at the moment. The tip of his black cat tail lay close to his face, wiggling every now and then to flick off nosy insects. Momo very carefully crept to her desk and opened a textbook to continue studying in peace. Sure, she could have probably just studied in the library instead, but she didn't want to give the damn cat the satisfaction of knowing he made her move. Still, as much as she disliked him, it was gratifying to see him so much healthier than when they first met. He had just a tiny hint of muscle under his skin now where before there was only bone. His gaunt face, which was once covered in dirt and grime and God knows what else, was now always clean with a bit more meat in his very pinchable-looking cheeks. Aside from his cattail, his fluffy black hair also had prominent vent-like intakes sticking from the top that almost reassembled cat ears. Momo slowly opened the window to not startle him. She was planning to slip that damn saxophone off him when the sound of him apparently purring in his sleep made her heart melt. Despite herself, Momo had to admit that the asshole was pretty damn cute. She looked behind her to make sure her door was locked. Then, she looked down to make sure none of the staff or God forbid her parents were around to see what she was about to do. Once she made sure the coast was clear, she carefully crept out the window and onto the thick branch Ren was sleeping on. Instead of reaching for the saxophone, she succumbed to her intrusive thoughts and placed a tentative hand on the sleeping cat boy's fluffy head. His hair felt soft to the touch, like candy floss minus the stickiness. She was so busy delighting herself in petting him that she didn't realize he'd stopped purring. "Meow," said Ren dryly, his wide-open coppery orange eyes giving Momo a blank stare as she patted his head. Momo leaned back so quickly she nearly fell off the tree branch. "Whoa there." Ren caught Momo by the wrist before she could plummeted to the ground like Newton's apple. "Can't have you dying too soon. It'd make me look suspicious." Ren gently pulled Momo back onto the branch and didn't let go until she steadied herself. "Ugh." Momo brushed herself off, her face red from embarrassment. "Thanks, Ren." Ren raised an eyebrow at her. "I think that might be the first time you've called me by my actual name." "Well, we should be calling each other by our first names if we're going to be siblings now," said Momo, eager to move the conversation away from her attempt to pet her new adoptive brother. Ren shrugged. "Whatever you say, princess." He crossed his legs and gave his saxophone an ear-screeching toot, seemingly just to annoy her. Momo cringed and pressed her palms against her ears until he ran out of breath, which was way longer than it had any right to be. "That probably means his lungs recovered at least." "You suck at that, you know," said Momo as Ren caught his breath. "The point is to train my lungs, not sound good." Ren wiped the spit off his saxophone. "Besides, I'll get better. Your mom and dad just offered to get me some real lessons." "I pity the tutor they hire," said Momo dryly. Ren's left eye twitched. "The hell's that supposed to mean?" "It means there's a higher chance for you to beat All Might in a fistfight than have the discipline required to learn a musical instrument." It was not normally in Momo's nature to act so snooty, but in Ren's case, she was willing to make an exception. Ren narrowed his eyes. "Game on, bitch," he said with a completely straight face. "Give me a year and I'll fucking school your arse in the music room." "Oh really?" Momo crossed her arms and looked down at Ren. "Yes, really." Ren met her gaze and straightened himself as much as possible to make up the height difference. "Me. A year from now. Me on the sax and you on the piano." "You're on," said Momo before pausing. "Wait, how'd you know I played the piano?" "Your mum mentioned it when she and your dad were telling me about getting a martial arts trainer and a nutritionist." "Oh yeah." A smug grin came across Momo's face. "You're going to get humbled so badly. You have no idea." "I can handle it." Ren puffed up his chest in pride. "I was already pretty tough before, but my body's been doing stellar ever since I stopped eating from garbage cans." "Oh really?" "Yes, really," said Ren. "Teleport quirk aside, I can feel my cat bits getting stronger now that I'm getting actual goddamn nourishment. Check this shit out." Ren held up his right hand and bent fingers into jagged curves, causing 5 sharp claws to protrude from them. "Whoa." Momo took a moment to look at Ren's claws. "Are those ... your nails? They can grow at will now." "Nah, they're more like a second set of sharper nails under my regular fingernails." Ren flexed his fingers over and over, causing the claws to retract and extend each time. "I would have kicked your posh arse if I had these bad boys when we first fought." Momo rolled her eyes. "Please, I would have blasted you to bits with a beanbag cannon if I weren't holding back." "Huh." Ren flicked a finger down against Momo's nose, much to her annoyance. "As if you could keep up with my speed and finesse. We cats are nature's ninjas." "Oh really?" "Yes, really." Momo was about to retort with something snarky when a knock at her bedroom door startled her. "Momo dear," came Mrs. Yaoyorozu's voice outside the bedroom door. "Dinner's ready. Come down to eat." Momo carefully crawled back to her bedroom window and stuck her head inside. "I'll be there in a minute, mother," she called out. "We're having salmon today," said Mrs. Yaoyorozu cheerfully. "Have you seen Ren? He definitely wouldn't want to miss today's dinner." "Yeah, he's right." Momo turned around to look at Ren only to see empty air where he once was. "Here." Momo grit her teeth and looked down, around, and everywhere else for a trace of the catboy only to be awarded with absolutely nothing. "Nature's ninja, huh?" Momo scoffed, but smiled to herself when she was sure Ren was gone. "Show off." Ren's new martial arts instructor looked him up and down. Her cool gray eyes scrutinized every scar on his pale body as he stood shirtless in the Yaoyorozu estate's private dojo. I can work with this." Kagami tapped her chin in thought. "You've been following the diet outlined by your nutritionist, right? It included a lot of fish, so I had no problems with it." Ren's black cattail quivered in joy upon remembering the delicious baked salmon he had for breakfast that morning. "Can I start my martial arts training now?" "Yes, but first we have to decide on what fighting style you should learn," said Kagami. "You can put your shirt back on now." "I don't have any particular preferences." Ren slid on the top of his black gi. Why don't you just teach me whatever yours is? Kid, if I tried to teach you all the styles I know, we'd be here forever. She pointed a confident thumb at herself with a smile on her pretty face. My quirk is called mastery. By watching martial arts masters at work, I can imprint their muscle memory onto myself and gain all their skills. That sounds like cheating, Ren said bluntly. More so than the ability to defy the laws of space-time. 𝐻MPH. Touche. Ren stretched his limbs and let out a stifled yawn. By the way, is it true that you used to teach the princess? You mean Momo? Asked Kagami. Yes, I taught her bujutsu and a bit of hand-to-hand. I see. On an unrelated note, what martial art would you recommend for beating up a bujutsu practitioner? Kagami let out a small laugh. The martial art itself matters less than the one who masters it, she assured him. There can be many different styles and variations even within the same discipline. How do you suggest we decide on my style then? Ren asked. Try to teach me multiple styles and see which one sticks the best. The corners of Kagami's lips pulled up into a grin. Not a bad idea, but I have a better one. She placed a hand on her hips and looked down at Ren, towering at least 30 centimeters over him. Fight me. Ren blinked at her. The pupils of his coppery orange eyes dilated into slits. Excuse me. Fight me, Kagami repeated. No hold bars. Pretend I'm a villain coming at your new parents and try to take me down. After taking a few seconds to process the request, Ren shrugged. Well, I'm down to throw hands, but what exactly do you hope to accomplish by this? It'll allow me to recognize your strengths and weaknesses firsthand so I can pick a style that'll fit you, Kagami explained. You can learn a lot about a person by fighting them, but you probably know that. I didn't learn shit from fighting the princess, said Ren dryly, except that crotch kicks are just as effective on women as they are on men. That just means you have plenty of room to learn. Kagami raised her hands in a defensive position, her legs spreading out in a low fighting stance. I'm ready whenever, Ren. Sure, I just gotta get the rules down first, said Ren. I told you, there are no rules, said Kagami. Pretend like this is a real fight. Like a street fight. Exactly. So no rules whatsoever. No rules whatsoever, Kagami confirmed. Don't worry about hurting me. I can take. She was cut off when Ren suddenly kicked her hard between the legs. Kagami's eyes nearly flew from its sockets. A breathless wheeze flew from her mouth as sharp pain tore through her nethers. Before she could regain her bearings, Ren grabbed her by the sides of her head with clawed hands and sent a flying knee into her face. Kagami stumbled backwards. A warm liquid trickled down her forehead and into her eyes, tinting her vision red. Did he cut me just now? She was barely able to finish the thought before she glimpsed Ren sliding past her between her legs to deliver a punch to her crotch, followed by a sweep kick that knocked her onto the ground. Kagami felt her shoulder crash against the tatami mat hard enough to nearly dislocate it. A flurry of stomps to the face shook her brain inside her skull as her head was ping-ponged between the floor and Ren's bare foot. Once she regained her bearings, Kagami caught Ren's foot before it could hit her face another time and threw it up with all her strength. Ren rolled with the throw, backflipping off Kagami's hand before landing on all fours and charging at her again just as she managed to stand up again. House get my arse, this kid's a panther, Kagami thought to herself as Ren threw a wild storm of kicks and punches at unpredictable angles. Her superhuman eyes barely kept up with the relentless assault through the pounding headache and blood obscuring her vision. Over the course of 2 odd decades, Kagami had watched and fought with countless master martial artists, but Ren was a different beast entirely. He had no particular style to speak of. Nothing to analyze or come up with a strategic counter for. Just pure unpredictability made all the more pronounced by the inhuman agility given to him by his feline quirk. Every few seconds he'd switch from boxing on 2 feet like a brawler in a street fight to skittering on all fours with slashing claws. Once Ren realized that she was worse at defending against the latter, he went all in on it, slashing at her joints and face with his claws. Kagami was blinded by blood in her eyes, covered in cuts strategically placed to hurt her joints, and didn't have a second to think as blow after blow rained down on her. The effectiveness of her human martial arts were hampered against an opponent who seemed to have little interest in being neither human nor a martial artist. Only muscle memory and sheer grit earned through years of fighting kept her from being overwhelmed. On one reckless lunge, Ren was caught off guard when Kagami grabbed him from the air and pinned him to the ground in a rear-naked chokehold. He struggled for a bit before biting into Kagami's arm hard enough for his sharp feline fangs to draw blood. Kagami winced in pain but refused to let go. Her eyes were still partially blind from the blood trickling into them from the cuts Ren made on her forehead. It would be difficult to get another chance to keep him down like this, and she wasn't going to waste it. Ren then promptly vanished from her hold in a puff of black mist, having tethered himself to her gi during their grapple. Oh, Kagami thought to herself, realizing she messed up. I forgot he could do that. A flying dropkick hit her in the back, causing her to stumble forward. She turned around, her arms already guarding her head to protect it from another blow. But instead of striking her head, Ren charged at her on all fours from below, headbutting her in the stomach in an attempt to tackle her to the ground. When she resisted, Ren stomped on her foot, holding her in place while he threw an uppercut to her chin. Kagami felt like she was being nearly torn in two between her pinned foot and uppercutted head. The excruciating pain racking her body was only surpassed by how genuinely impressed she was. No doubt about it, she thought to herself as she threw punches back at Ren, who managed to dodge or teleport away from almost all of them with uncanny agility. This kid's a prodigy. Kagami adjusted her strategy, falling into the defensive and trying to gauge Ren's attacks as best she could from the sound of his movements and the movement of the air around her. He came up with a strategy to counter me on the fly. Take me by surprise, then blind me with my own blood so I can't properly read him with my quirk. Then to make things worse, he adjusts his fighting style to an animalistic one so I can't fall back on my martial arts instincts. Kagami grabbed Ren by the collar of his gi and threw him at a wall. The mind of a genius and the intuition of a wild beast. As far as martial arts senses go, he's the ideal. Ren planted his feet against the wall and used it to launch himself at Kagami, claws drawn and feline fangs snarling like a rabid animal. But even so, Kagami returned Ren's wall lunge with a charge of her own. At the very last second, Kagami weaved to one side away from Ren's trajectory and clotheslined him hard in the chest, knocking the air out of her lungs and pinning him to the ground. No amount of talent beats experience. Ren laid on the ground, spent and panting from the blow to his chest. His body remained still aside from the rapid rising and falling of his chest. "Let's take a little break," said Kagami in between pants. She was just as tired as Ren was and a dozen times more injured. And yet, she was smiling. After years of being the best martial artist around, it was a little refreshing to almost get her shit rocked, even if she could have done without the crotch shots. "Yeah, that sounds good," said Ren, half groaning in pain and exhaustion. Minutes later, Ren and Kagami were in the mansion dining room licking their wounds. A first aid kit was on the table, which Kagami used to disinfect and wrap up the various cuts and bite marks Ren had inflicted on her. Meanwhile, Ren sat enjoying a healthy smoothie made for him by the family butler. His cattail flicked side to side in contentment under him. "You did pretty well," Kagami said in the understatement of the century as she finally patched up the cuts above her forehead. "But you have some points that could need improving." "I'm all ears," said Ren through the smoothie straw in his mouth. "For starters, you could learn how to conserve your energy better." Kagami plopped back a dislocated finger, then opened and closed her hand to test it. "You're fast, but you're not all that much stronger than a kid your age. My claws make up for it." Ren flicked on his retractable claws with a smug grin on his face. "Your claws help, but you shouldn't rely on them," said Kagami. "Most of your attacks are far too wild. While a certain degree of wildness can make you unpredictable to the opponent, veer too much into it and you'll just be wasting precious stamina on unnecessary strikes. I know how to target my hits." "Yeah, I figured." Kagami still felt an ache in her crotch where Ren had hit her multiple times. "But the majority of your attacks are still wild with only a few targeted strikes interspersed between them. You need to cut the wild strikes way down and learn to hit where it hurts instead. Like the crotch." "Aside from the crotch," said Kagami. "Pretty sure you already have that technique down pat." "In my defense, there are very few fights that can't be won or at least significantly tipped in my favor by a good crotch shot," said Ren. "If I was ever caught back when I was a thief, I'd often just kick whoever caught me in the crotch and run away. Worked out just fine for me until I met the princess." "It won't work on villains either," Kagami warned. "You need to change your mindset from a thief to a hero. Fighting isn't just a way to distract your mark so you can run away anymore. You have to learn how to take a person down and subdue them so that those around them are safe." HMPH. Ren sucked in a mouthful of smoothie and leaned back on his chair. "So have you decided on what martial art to teach me yet?" "Kali, no doubt about it. The discipline largely focuses on weapons training. Your agility and almost disturbing lack of hesitation to hurt people makes you perfect for it, no offense." Ren shrugged. "None taken. But shouldn't I also know how to fight barehanded too?" "We can supplement it with Muay Thai for empty hand training," Kagami assured him. "Maybe some judo and wrestling for throws and grapples to cover all our bases." "Did you teach the princess this many martial arts when you trained her?" "No, for her it was mainly bujutsu and a little bit of karate." Kagami finished wrapping up the last of her wounds. "She's a brilliant, hard-working girl, but to be brutally honest, hand-to-hand combat just ain't her forte. Knowing just enough to get by is fine for her so she can focus on other areas. Her true potential lies in being a support hero with her quirk." "Where do you think my potential lies then?" Ren asked. "Combat and recon." "No questions asked," said Kagami. "Your quirk is useful for both stealth and fighting. I can help train you in the latter, but you'll have to figure out the stealth bit yourself." "I'll be fine," said Ren. "I spent most of my life sneaking to places I shouldn't be." "That doesn't mean you can slouch on your training," Kagami warned. "Experienced or not, you still have a long way to go, and you'll get sloppy if you don't train. Even the finest sword plunged into salt water will eventually rust." Yeah, no need to quote Sun Tzu to me," said Ren. Don't worry, I'll figure out the ninja stealth shit on my own. Kagami let out a soft chuckle. You're full of surprises, aren't you, kid? It's best to always mystify, mislead, and surprise the enemy if possible, said Ren, throwing back an abridged quote of his own. And as far as I'm concerned, anyone who isn't me is an enemy. That's a bit depressing, said Kagami. Do you really think that? I do, said Ren before stopping himself. Well, used to anyways. I'm still not sure how much I trust the princess and her parents, but they seem like decent enough folks, which is surprising considering how rich they are. They're good people, said Kagami. You can trust them. If you say so, said Ren, though he didn't sound all too convinced. Kagami only left late in the afternoon. Mr. and Mrs. Ieyasu saw her off, trying their best to hide their surprise at how battered she was. How did Ren do? Mrs. Ieyasu looked concerned with how bloody Kagami was. He wasn't too much trouble, was he? Mr. Ieyasu asked. It's nothing I couldn't handle, said Kagami with a bloody gummed smile. The kid's just full of potential. I dare say he's in my top 5 students of all time. Is there anything we can do to help with his training? No, you two just leave his martial arts training to me. Kagami's expression softened along with her voice. But, if you don't mind the suggestion, it might be good if you both spent some time bonding with him every now and then. I mean, it's not like I don't want to do that, said Mrs. Ieyasu. But we also want to respect his privacy, you know. Mr. Ieyasu nodded in agreement. The boy's been through a lot already. We don't want to put too much pressure on him. I understand that, said Kagami. Just keep it in mind, all right. Something tells me that the kid's scars run deeper than his skin. We will, Mrs. Ieyasu assured her. See you next week, Kagami-sensei. And thank you again. Kagami left the house with her mind running through lesson plans for her most promising pupil yet. Said pupil, for his part, spent most of the day after training locked inside his room. At one point, several of the household staff spotted Ren walking to his room holding plastic bags full of God knows what, having apparently left the mansion in secret to buy them with his hefty allowance. None of them spoke to anyone about it, deciding that whatever it was probably his own business that they were better off not knowing. When day turned to night, Mrs. Ieyasu had Momo bring Ren down from his room to have dinner with the family. Momo knocked on the door to Ren's room a little louder than what was necessary in case he was having another cat nap. Hey, Ren, she called out to him. It's time for dinner. Come out. In a moment, shouted Ren from inside the room. There was a metallic cranking sound, followed by something like crackling electricity. Curious, Momo tried to open the door. When it turned out to be locked, she used her quirk to make a key to open it anyways. What are you? The last got stuck in Momo's throat when she saw the room. Random junk and paper drawings filled the study desk, where Ren was hunched over something she couldn't see. Nosy bugger, Ren muttered to himself as he continued working on whatever it was he was so focused on. Ren, what is all this? Momo walked over to Ren and looked over his shoulder. Is that a socket wrench attached to a battery? It's a homemade taser. Ren held up the long socket wrench, which had insulated tape wrapped all around the handle and a switch torn from an electric torch. He flicked the switch and the battery crammed in the socket lit up with crackling blue electricity. Ren, why are you making a homemade taser? Asked Momo. Well, I'm going to need hero equipment when I get into UA. Ren turned off the pipe taser and set it aside. Kagami-sensei has been teaching me Kali stick fighting. I thought a stick with a built-in taser for extra oomph would help give me an edge. It's a bit jury-rigged though, ain't it? Ren shrugged. I had a more complex design, but it wasn't practical to make. He reached into a huge pile of sketchy blueprints and handed one to Momo. Momo studied the highly complicated and meticulously detailed blueprint for a high-tech taser baton up and down. This ... is a really solid design. I could see this actually working. It's actually kind of impressive. Yeah, but it'd be way too hard to make, said Ren before turning his attention back to his work desk. I have some other equipment in mind too, like smoke bombs, specialized shurikens, a grapple gun. Ren, said Momo dryly with a deadpan look on her face. Well, the grapple gun might be a bit redundant since I can teleport, but it won't hurt to have one around just in case. I can use some super pressurized gas cans to power it. Ren, Momo repeated, louder this time. I've also begun working on sketches for a mask, said Ren, clearly getting carried away showing off how smart he was. I'll probably use a cheap festival mask or something as a base, then combine it with a high-grade dust mask and charcoal. It should be a decent enough gas mask so I don't choke on my own smoke bombs. Ren, the smoke bombs themselves should be pretty easy to make, Ren continued. I'll just need some ping pong balls, tin foil, and a bit of potassium. Ren. Momo spun Ren around on his swivel chair to face her. She looked him straight in his coppery orange eyes and held her hand up to his face. Glowing pink and blue matter shot from her palm. It materialized into a prototype of the taser baton shown on Ren's blueprint, perfectly replicated down to the listed sizes and dimensions. Ren started at the prototype, then at Momo. Momo placed the black polymer baton on his lap. He picked it up and flicked on the switch, causing its weighted tip to crackle with bright blue electricity much more powerful than the pipe attached to a battery on his desk. Though, Ren took a moment to just stare at his new weapon. "I forgot you could do that." Silence fell between the two, which was only broken by the sound of Mrs. Ieyasu calling for them to come down for dinner.